Okay, 4.2 Abyss. Nobody likes intros anyway. Floor 11 as usual starts with the Monolith Chamber, so your damage and killing speed are irrelevant, and it's all about crowd control. In first half, new enemies will spawn one by one as soon as you kill one, so target priority is the most important thing here. First of all, note that if you break crab's shields, they will do nothing for the rest of the fight, so you should keep them alive until the very end to have less enemies to deal with. Whopper flowers are usually willing to fight you, and they too can be stunned for a bit if you manage to break their shields, so always keep track of them and don't let them charge their strong attacks. And finally, slimes are the most dangerous here, so you actually want to get rid of them ASAP. Enemies here spawn all over the place, so focus enemies one by one to make sure that you will have just one new enemy to aggro after each kill. And as usual, against pyro shields, Hydro is the best option, so make your team around it to have easier time here. Second half is just a joke. All of the enemies focus on you rather than on the monolith, so just don't fight close to it and you will finish this half with no monolith damage at all. All of the enemies here have increased physical resistance, so it's better to rely on elemental damage to speed things up. In first half of Chamber 2, immediately get rid of the Summoner to prevent burning. Then do your best to push one of the lectors towards the other one. You can do it with just your attacks. Every stagger slightly pushes them back. Also, lectors will be pushed away from you when you damage them enough to make them activate their shield and when you destroy the Darkfire Furnace they summon, so with proper positioning you don't even need strong pulling abilities. The main problem here is their pyro shields, so bring enough Hydro application to quickly deal with them. Electro is technically the second best option against pyro shields, but it's twice weaker than Hydro, so it's better to just go heavily on the latter. Second half starts with primal constructs, and you can stack them together without pulling if you run to the left or right side. I prefer the left one because it seems a bit faster. They shouldn't cause problems, but if your damage is not high enough to kill them before they turn invisible, remember that the quickest way to knock them out of invisibility is to trigger Quicken or Freeze, or even petrify them if you have Zhongli. A single stone enchanter that comes next is not a big deal either. Just focus on his pet first as usual, and remember that Geo deals more damage to both the pet and Eremite himself while he is stunned after you kill the pet. Third chamber starts with Operatives duo, and they are resistant to their respective elements. They can apply Life Bond effect with their special attacks that not only drains HP of affected characters, but also increases damage they take from the same attack if they get hit again while Life Bond is active. So make sure to either become a dodge god or bring reliable source of healing to cleanse Life Bond ASAP. However, once you manage to stagger the operatives, it's pretty easy to chain stun them or even launch them up in the air, so high poise damage combined with crowd control works great here. In second half we have another duo, but this time it's just Wish-Ups. Funny, the counter to them is the same though. Wish-Ups are very easy to stagger, so with high poise damage they will barely be able to do anything. They fight in melee, but you'll probably have to fight them one at a time anyway because of their size, so keep an eye on the other one to interrupt its channeling AoE right away and prevent unnecessary damage. Here are the teams that I used to clear this floor and their builds, and before you ask, yes, Kali had no artifacts on her because I'm too lazy to farm that many Dentra sets, and I just forgot who didn't have one. First half of floor 12 is just way too much stuff. It's not difficult as long as you have solid Hydro application to deal with pyro shields, but it's just a lot of bulky enemies. Rift Hounds will be your first problem, and their movement is pure random, so just do your best to hit them both with your attacks when possible. The last part though is what you can optimize the most if you lack damage. Focus on one of the Breachers trying to keep Abyss Lector behind it and hit him with AoEs when possible. I found it helpful to leave the other Breacher shielded for longer, because when Breacher wakes up after losing its shield, it will try to keep its distance from you and thus will move away from the Lector if you're still busy with the other one. However, with just one of them alive, you can make it do the opposite. Remember, keep Lecter behind the Breacher when it's not attacking, but if it uses melee combo, Breacher actually aggressively pushes itself at you, so run around to move it closer to Lecter in order to again damage Lecter through Breacher. Another thing worth noting is that both Lecter and Darkfire Furnace he summons have higher target priority, so your characters will tend to attack them rather than Breachers if you stay in between. But unlike Breachers, Lecter is squishy, so it's better to always focus on Breachers. In other words, proper positioning is very important here if you want to save some time. And lastly, final wave is pretty intense, so don't forget to bring enough healing or shields to survive there. Second half is just a Simon, which is very easy to deal with if you bring reliable way to proc Quicken on it to knock it out of invisibility without wasting time. And remember that it always just jumps forward in the direction it faces when it becomes invisible. Chamber 2, same thing as before, way too many enemies in the first half and you can't really do much about it. I found it easier to run back in the very beginning to stack the enemies together and do your best to lure rolling mechs into the wall to keep them close. For the second wave, getting rid of the turret first is quite helpful to prevent freeze, and you can even prevent female mech from summoning it in the first place if you manage to stagger her right away. And for the last wave, deal with the small mechs first and either disable annoying construct specialist with Uzi attacks or just bring enough poise buffs, most likely in form of shields, to have easier time against it. Second half, just a Terror Shroom. Aggravate team is the best option against it, and the main time save here is unfortunately just being lucky and not getting a running and rage attack, so it might take a couple of resets before you get a good pattern. The best thing you can do during the fight is to run behind the boss when it's about to enrage to prevent being hit by its close range combo. Floor 12 pattern continues for Chamber 3 as well, and once again, proper positioning is the key here. Pyro skirmishers jump away from you, so in the beginning, force both of them to jump towards the edge and closer to each other. Quickly deal with them first, then focus on killing both Kairagi at the same time, otherwise the one left alive will heal and buff himself, which is a major time loss. Abyss Lecters that spawn next can be brought close to each other if you run into a wall for a bit. Even though it's a time sink, it's still worth doing, because with proper positioning you can keep them together and damage both of them and then their shields at the same time. If you just jump to this part skipping floor 11, I gave more details about positioning against Lecters in floor 11 Chamber 2, so go back and watch that part. Fighting Capella in second half is much easier if you either bring Numa characters to interrupt her climax early or stick to ranged combat. Fighting her in melee is painful because she deals a lot of damage and constantly pushes you back, but it's somewhat doable with good shields or healing, so at least bring those and be very careful until the climax ends. The raw power level required for this abyss is higher than before, just because there are way too many enemies in the first half all along. And my usual aggravate team was not good enough for Chamber 3, so I had to replace it with stronger Hyperbloom. Hyperbloom, however, could not beat Terror Shroom in time, so I got curious how much power I was lacking, and I did some grinding. And this is what it took to make an aggravate team strong enough to barely finish Chamber 3 in time as well, using it for the second half. So honestly, switching teams for Chamber 2 or 3 seems more viable, but as always, I'll leave it up to you to decide. Anyway, that's all I have for you this time. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and have a great rest of your day.